if we consider this intelligence link and frankly the others we have seen in recent years, as a member of the House Intel Committee, to what degree are you concerned about the protection of not just secrets pertaining to our own national security, but the security as well of allies like Israel?
Oh, I'm extremely concerned, and I'm glad that the FBI initiated this investigation into determining whether this was a leak or whether this was somehow a compromise. But regardless, this should never have happened. And so going forward, we have to take whatever steps are necessary to protect this information, not only ours, but as you mentioned, those of our friends, partners, and allies.
Well, bring us inside to the extent that you can. Congressman, your viewpoint on the Intel Committee, should we expect hearings? And where will this investigation take place inside Congress?
I don't know. I'm not sure that there would be hearings. In any case, I think that it would probably be in a classified space. I'll be back on Monday, and probably one of the first things that I'll do is I'll be going through my homework book, so to speak, reading all the different wires and classified information with regard to this particular topic, as well as a number of others.
Well, and I'm sure among those other topics, it does pertain to your work on the China Select Committee as well. We have heard a lot about China on the campaign trail, frankly, from both of the candidates. Donald Trump touting tariffs as his favorite word. Kamala Harris indicating she wants to win the technology war against China, if you will, make sure we're competitive in this next century of technology. Where are you seeing a distinction between the way in which these candidates approach China? Is this entirely a level of tariffs conversation versus a question around whether tariffs or export controls are going to exist? This is just a matter of degree, right?
Well, not necessarily. I think that I think on a bipartisan basis, there's concern about the export of technology, or for that matter, investments by Americans in companies of concern in China, especially a company like Huawei, which should never have access to either high-end semiconductor manufacturing equipment or chips, for that matter. However, there's another part of this, which I think Kamala Harris has talked about as well, which is we got to improve our own competitiveness as an economy, meaning we have to make sure we invest in basic science research and development, which later gets commercialized into the latest technology of the future. But we also have to upgrade the skills of our workforce and fix our legal immigration system to attract and retain the best and the brightest people to innovate and become the entrepreneurs of the future in these technologies. So on the one hand, we have to play defense with regard to the export of technology to China and other countries, but we also have to improve our ability to innovate here in the U.S.
Congressman, we're hearing today from Taiwan Semiconductor in an interesting development here, informing the United States of a possible attempt by Huawei to circumvent export controls and actually buy some of the product coming out of Taiwan Semiconductor. Coming off of their earnings report recently, this is a company that's not only doing well, but beating and raising estimates, growing faster than investors even expected with the demand that we're getting from chips designed by the likes of NVIDIA. When you hear about a story like this, how concerned are you about the growth that this company is experiencing and, of course, the liability that it brings being in Taiwan?
Well, I'm very concerned, and we should expect the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, along with entities controlled by the CCP, including Huawei, by the way. Just so your audience knows, the reason Huawei is such a company of concern is that it is part of the mass surveillance and detention architecture that the Chinese government has erected with regard to the Uyghurs, for instance. They've engaged in various other nefarious activities over time, and that's why they are on the sanctions list. So when Huawei or other companies try to buy these chips, whether it's from TSMC, which is manufacturing for another company, or TSMC's own chips, then we're concerned about those chips being used in those very nefarious activities that American taxpayers and citizens are concerned about. So that's why we have to do everything we can to prevent our companies from inadvertently selling into clandestine front companies for Huawei and others on the entity list, or preventing TSMC from inadvertently doing the same, and working with our friends, partners, and allies about their companies, too.
But Congressman, to the kind of second point of Joe's question around just the geographic base of TSMC and the concern around vulnerability or exposure to Taiwan specifically, with an unknown exactly as to how China will be approaching Taiwan. How do you expect that part of the conversation to look different depending on who ends up in the White House in January?
Well, Kamala Harris has made it very clear that she wants the status quo to prevail in terms of China not initiating aggression toward Taiwan, and of course, Taiwan not making provocative moves either. Now, with regard to Donald Trump, we've heard him say some statements that are very concerning, which make it sound as though he would be less kind of exercised about hostilities initiated against Taiwan, that he would somehow send a signal that we would not be there to provide articles of self-defense or equipment or what is necessary to the Taiwanese for them to deter aggression. And that's very concerning, because when you don't build up deterrence, you are inviting aggression. That is the lesson that we've learned from history and with regard to the CCP.
Well, let's hear from Donald Trump. He actually sat down with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait, last week, and had this to say when asked if he would commit, for instance, to putting American troops on the ground to defend Taiwan if it were invaded by China.
Well, the reason they're doing it now is they're not going to do it afterwards, okay? It's, so they're doing it now. They want to do it China. Now, look, I had a very good relationship with President Xi, and a very good relationship with Putin, and a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un, who has a nuclear force that you won't even believe.
Congressman, a little hard to tell what he meant by that. He didn't exactly answer the question, but did point to his relationship with President Xi. What would a Trump 2.0 mean then for this relationship and for the future of Taiwan?
I don't know what he was talking about. I don't think he knew exactly either. He said something about how he had a great relationship with Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un, which to me is concerning in and of itself. But I'm not sure what a Trump 2.0 foreign policy would look like in that region. What I do know is that, unfortunately, our friends, partners, and allies would not be reassured by those statements that he made just now, whether it's South Korea or Japan, given his statements about Kim Jong-un, or whether it's neighbors in the region who are banding together with us, like Australia and India through the Quad, to deal with the CCP's aggression in the South China Sea, among other places. And so we have to do what it takes to reassure them, because when we reassure them, then they work together with us to establish the international rules of the road, which, again, I come back to the point, it lessens the possibility of aggression and lessens the possibility of instability in the region.